In the magical world of Alnieth, there is an ongoing war between the mortals with limited lifespans and the immortals with respawn hacks. The outcome of the war depended on the battle between the two strongest men on both sides, Graham the human hero and Veltal, the demon lord ruling over the immortals. A battle like this would normally be a lost cause since Veltal is immortal, but with the holy sword Graham possessed, he was able to deal a blow strong enough that it somehow overcame Veltal's regeneration and led to his demise. Veltal couldn't help but praise the hero for managing to defeat him, but he was still salty about losing to a mortal, so in his final moments he swore that he would return to get his revenge, and with that he vanished from the world. Years later, Veltal awakens once more, and he is greeted by one of his loyal servants, Makina. She kneels before him and says she has patiently waited 500 years for the day that he would return, and she apologizes for having to attend to him in such informal attire, but Veltal says he doesn't mind. He's just glad she managed to perform his reincarnation ritual and bring him back to life, but with that said, he has no clue where they are and wants to begin his conquest of Alnieth once more. However, about that, Makina tells him a lot of stuff happened in the 500 years since his death, and Alnieth, it's gone. Around 80 years ago, Alnieth and Earth were caught in a major catastrophe, which caused the two worlds to fuse with one another. As a result, 90% of the population was wiped out and national governments ceased to function. So cities began to operate as independent states, and a few wars have broken out since then, but things are relatively peaceful now. That's the present state of the world, and given that Earth possessed incredibly advanced technology and Alnieth possessed magitech, the fusion of the two worlds led to a lot of rapid advancement. Makina leads him to the surface to show him what the new world looks like, and Veltal is astounded by how far the world has come, but in his astonishment, he forgets to pay attention to his surroundings, so he nearly bumps into a random guy in the street, and Makina has to push him out of the way. He apologizes to her for letting himself get distracted, but he can't believe that man so carelessly bumped into her, one of the 6 dark peers. It's almost as if they don't know or care who she is, so Veltal is prepared to instill a new sense of fear into these foolish mortals. He raises his hand to the sky, and Makina already knows what he's about to do, so she tries to tell him it's not a good idea, but it's already too late as he has already fired his spell into the sky and created a massive hole in the cloud cover. In an anticlimactic turn of events, the people seem more annoyed than scared by the fact that someone was dumb enough to use magic in the city, and an alarm goes off soon after, so Makina explains that it is forbidden to use grand magic within the city, so they have to get out of here before they get in trouble. Veltal doesn't understand why he has to do something as cowardly as running away, but since Makina insists, he goes along with her. However, as they are leaving, Veltal notices someone who looks a lot like the hero Graham, but he has no time to confront the man as Makina continues to drag him away. Once they are out of danger, Makina sits down with Veltal and informs him that after he died, the Immortals had to sign a ceasefire with the mortals and the war between them ended. But when the worlds fused 80 years ago, the citizens of the Immortal Kingdom were forced to scatter all across the world, and not long after, the major industries began a crusade against them. Veltal asks what she means, so Makina tells him that the people of the world collectively decided that immortals didn't deserve human rights, so they began relentlessly hunting them. At first it wasn't that bad, but then people developed anti-immortal weaponry, and from that point on, immortals were killed on sight to the point of near extinction. It takes a few moments for Veltal to process that his people have been wiped out, but once he comes to terms with it, he asks Makina if she knows what happened to the other 5 dark peers. The whereabouts of May, Sowold, and Ralshin are all unknown, but sadly, Zinol is confirmed to be dead. He sacrificed himself and acted as a decoy so Makina can escape from the hunters, and he said he was doing it for the sake of Veltal, because aside from Ralshin, Makina was the only other person capable of performing Veltal's reincarnation ritual. Zinol had always been a loyal follower of Veltal, so he is grateful to have had such a good subordinate, but there's still one more person Makina hasn't mentioned, so Veltal asks her about Marcus. Makina doesn't really want to talk about Marcus, so tries to change the subject and asks Veltal if he's thirsty. Veltal says he isn't though, so Makina has to make up an excuse as to why he needs to drink something and tells him to wait there while she goes to buy one. While she's gone, a VTuber starts streaming on some billboards, and he's wondering what the hell it's supposed to be, but then he notices several lights flowing around the area, and it seems to be caused by this one girl on a roof near the billboards. It's not clear what she's doing at first, but then she flicks her wrist, and in an instant, all the billboards start playing hub videos. The girl seems pretty pleased with herself, and no one knows she's the one who did it, so she starts walking away. But as she is leaving, Veltal calls out to her and she panics a little because she just got caught. She tries pretending that she's not involved in any way, but Veltal clearly saw her do something with the surrounding ether, and then all of a sudden, the screens changed. She can't believe someone was perceptive enough to figure out what she did based on the surrounding ether alone. So she asks Veltal who he is, although she doesn't take him seriously when he says he's the Demon Lord. Veltal explains that he knows she did something to the giant picture screens, but he doesn't understand the principle behind it, so he would love to learn about it from an expert like her. The girl is flattered that he thinks she's an expert on the subject, so she starts talking about how this was just some basic hacking, and by comparison, leaking the Pokemon files was way harder. All she did just now was take advantage of a fatal flaw in the billboard's logic barrier, and then she just slipped in some spicy videos for fun. Veltal interrupts her speech and tells her she is looking for one of his subordinates named Marcus, and he's wondering if she has any idea where he can find him. The girl points to the massive tower in the middle of the city and says the CEO of that company is named Marcus, so he might be able to find him if he goes there. Veltal follows her advice and heads up to the heavy magic industries in search of Marcus. As he enters, he spots this weird-looking thing waving at him, but he ignores it and heads to the front desk and tells the receptionist that he is here looking for Marcus. But before he's even done speaking, Marcus's private secretary comes down and says she is here to bring Veltal to Marcus. They both get on an elevator headed to the top of the tower, and while they go up, Veltal notices that the secretary has a pin of that thing he saw when he came in, so he asks what that is about. She proudly exclaims that this is the mascot of the company, and they plan to create a brand around it in the near future. Eventually, Veltal arrives at the top of the tower, where he finds Marcus sitting atop his throne. Marcus says it has been a long time since he last saw Veltal, but Veltal finds it disrespectful that Marcus is remaining seated while in the presence of his king. Marcus ignores him and asks what business he has here, so Veltal says he wants Marcus to help him rebuild the Immortal Kingdom. Marcus laughs in his face for a solid minute before telling him that he won't be doing that in a mocking tone. Veltal feels insulted, so he prepares to teach Marcus a painful lesson in respect. However, before he can cast his spell, Marcus's assistant strikes at him with a blade, so he is forced to dodge out of the way. He is shocked that she is capable of using armament forging magic, but before she attacks again, Marcus tells her to stand down. He then turns to Veltal and tells him he has become weak because in his prime, he would never have felt threatened by magic of that scale. How exactly doesn't he intend to take over the world if a single human is able to give him so much trouble? Marcus refuses to serve a king who is so pitiful, so he tells Veltal to get out of his sight before he forces him. Veltal is enraged and begins casting a spell to take Marcus down, but before he can finish, Marcus has already cast his spell Breaker and Veltal is left in shock because Marcus was never gifted enough to outclass him in spell casting. Marcus has been waiting for this moment for years, so he takes great pleasure in telling Veltal that his strength is a relic of the past. He reveals the implant in the back of his neck, but Veltal doesn't know what that thing is, so Marcus pulls up an instructional video explaining everything about it. The device is called a Familia, and while using magic normally requires a 5-step process: initialization, construction, expansion, incantation, and proclamation. This device allows people to skip 3 steps, so now anyone, and I mean anyone, can use magic at high levels. And in case Veltal is getting any ideas about implanting a Familia of his own, Marcus specifically designed it to be incompatible with higher beings like Veltal. That means he can never use a Familia, and while his natural spellcasting speed is superhuman compared to AI spellcasting, he might as well be sending his spells by mail. Veltal asks why Marcus is doing all of this, so Marcus reveals that he had never liked Veltal from the very day they met. He was tyrannical, arrogant, and worst of all, he had the skills to warrant his arrogance, so Marcus could never oppose him back then, but that all changes now. He tells Veltal that it's about time for him to leave, so he begins launching several blood swords at him, and Veltal isn't able to dodge all of them, so he ends up getting stabbed several times and launched out of the window. Marcus has always wanted to do that, and now that he has finally triumphed over Veltal, he declares that he is the new Demon Lord. But all that aside, his secretary really wants to discuss the promotional ideas she has for the company mascot, so Marcus tells her to submit her ideas at the next planning meeting. Meanwhile, Veltal has crash-landed back into the city, and his regeneration is far slower than it used to be, so he's having a hard time recovering from his injury. He tries to walk out into the street, but he accidentally bumps into someone, and as a result, he gets into a fight that he immediately loses. Now look at him laid out in a pile of trash. and wondering why he keeps losing to mortals like he lost to Graham until Makina eventually finds him. Makina gets him onto a train and begins apologizing for hesitating to inform him of Marcus's betrayal, and because of her hesitation, he ended up being disgraced so badly. He tells her there's no need to apologize because even if she had told him, he would have still wanted to confirm it for himself. Once the train comes to a stop, Makina leads Veltal to the apartment building she lives in and tells him this is her home. Veltal thinks she means the entire building belongs to her, but Makina leads him into her small room and explains that this is where she really lives. Veltal thinks she is joking at first, but Makina is dead serious because this is all she can afford with her salary. Veltal realizes she has been living like this all this time while waiting for his return, so he pulls her close and thanks her because he will never forget the loyalty she has shown him. Centuries ago, Makina was being persecuted by the people of her time because after they found out that she was immortal, they naturally blamed her for all their problems and decided that the best course of action would be to throw her into a volcano. However, before Makina could hit the lava, Veltal appeared out of nowhere to save her. This was their first time meeting, and the only reason Veltal came was because he heard there was another immortal like him in the area, and after seeing Makina for the first time, he was not disappointed. He extended an offer to her to devote her body and soul to him. And from that day forward, Makina has remained loyal to Veltal. She soon wakes up to her alarm, and before Veltal wakes up, she heads to the kitchen to make breakfast. While waiting for the soup to boil, she calls on her virtual assistant, Eliclate, and a miniature version of herself appears in her field of view. It gives her a breakdown of the date, time, and current weather conditions. Makina asks Elec how she's doing, so Elec runs a full diagnostic check on her systems and reports that everything is in perfect working order, which is good, but that's now exactly what Makina was asking. Makina finishes up with breakfast, and once she is done, she goes to wake Veltal up and serves him the food. He's never seen food like this before, but just by its smell, he can tell that it is going to taste great. He picks up the chopsticks to try it, and sure enough, he loves the food Makina made for him, and hearing it makes her extremely happy. Once he is done eating, Veltal asks if Makina knows of the location of any other immortals, and she does know of a few other immortals who managed to escape the immortal hunts. But recently, immortals have been going missing, and Makina has even lost contact with two of her close aides, Ornard and Palmlock. She hopes they just went into hiding, but with no way of contacting them, she can't be sure. Veltal asks if immortal hunts still happen, but she answers that the hunts actually ended decades ago. The hunts were started by Marcus to secure his position at the top, and now that he has all the power, he has no reason to continue. The resentment people had towards immortals has also dwindled over the years, so it's not particularly dangerous to be seen outside. After Makina's aides went missing, she went to their apartment to check up on them, and the place was a mess, so she assumes a fight happened. But the only clue she could find was this note with the words Immortal Furnace written on it. As Veltal reads the message, he reaches for his cup of tea, but a sudden sharp pain causes him to flinch, so he spills it everywhere. It seems that he still hasn't fully healed from the injuries he sustained yesterday, and it's not just his regeneration that got weaker, everything about him is weaker than it used to be. Even that spell he cast her when he first arrived would have had a much greater effect if Veltal were at full power, and Makina attributes this to the fact that the faith Veltal used as power during his prime no longer exists. As of now, he is only spoken of in history books. Without recognition, Veltal's powers will never truly return to him, but he thinks that should be easy enough to solve as he just has to make himself known once more. With that said, he tells Makina that he wants to head out and explore the surrounding area since sitting around all day would be bad for him. So Makina suggests that the two of them should go shopping. Out in the city, the first thing they should do is get Veltal a set of good street clothes, so they walk into a store and Makina asks him to step on the platform so the machine can take a 3D scan of his body. She apologizes for being limited to cheap store clothes due to her budget, but Veltal tells her he doesn't mind since his natural beauty would look good in any attire. After taking his measurements, she asks if Veltal has any preferences, but he doesn't know much about the style of the current era, so he leaves the choice up to Makina. Makina decides to ask Elec to make the most optimal choice for Veltal, taking into account budget and practicality, so after a bit of processing, Elec settles on a tracksuit. Makina doesn't think a tracksuit would be a good idea, but once Veltal sees it, he absolutely loves the way it looks, and he is even more intrigued by the design on the back. So Makina explains it's an old language used by the people who used to live on this land, and the symbols on the jacket spell out Demon Lord. Since Veltal seems to like it, she takes the tracksuit for him and walks out of the store. But before she leaves, he gets her attention because they haven't paid for it yet. However, Makina explains that all transactions are performed automatically. After that, they have some food at a fast food joint, and while they are sitting together, Veltal asks Makina what it's like to have a familia installed. Marcus's betrayal aside, the Familia is without a doubt a revolutionary device, so he is curious about it. Makina explains that it is really convenient since it not only allows for easier use of magic, but it can also be used to gather information, go shopping, or even communicate. Before Familias were mainstream, people had smartphones to do these things, but it was really inconvenient to have to hold it. Veltal asks her to let him see it, so he turns her around and begins touching it. Makina is a little startled at first, but she's actually really enjoying this, so much so that her Familia has to warn her that her heart rate just spiked. Once he is done inspecting it, Veltal asks her if it isn't uncomfortable having the Familia installed in the nape of her neck. And while it felt strange at first, she got used to it once it became illegal for companies to stream ads straight into people's heads. It's difficult to live daily life without one of these, but at the same time, having a Familia doesn't necessarily make your life better, as shown by her current living situation. As they walk home, Veltal makes a declaration that he will get a job. Makina is taken aback and tells Veltal that he doesn't need to do something as lowly as working. Her living conditions may be suboptimal right now, but she assures him that she will provide a better lifestyle for him. She says she will just pick up more shifts or maybe even get 2 or 3 more jobs. But Veltal interrupts her and says that times have changed. He is no longer the omnipotent god he once was, so he needs to adapt to the current circumstances. And most importantly, he wouldn't feel right if he just sat back and did nothing while Makina worked to provide him with food, clothing, and shelter. Without his duties as king to occupy him, he will need to take up labor. But that does not mean he has given up on conquering the world, so he asks Makina if she is willing to continue to serve him, and Makina swears to be by his side for the rest of her life. Later that day, Veltal is about to head out to look for a job, but Makina refuses to let him go without her because she's worried about him. Veltal tells her she can't come since she has her own job to worry about, but Makina says she can just call off for the day so she can go with him. Veltal refuses to let her do that, so he reminds her that in the unlikely event that he fails to find a job, he would have to rely on her income, so she can't just skip out on her job. Makina agrees to let him go on his own, but for safety, she hands Veltal a device that comes with a little money in case of emergencies. It also has a tracker, so if there's any trouble, Veltal can use this to contact her, and she will race over as soon as possible. He realizes that she is worried about him, but the extent she is going to just makes him feel like a child. Still, even though he said he wanted to go by himself, he doesn't have a clue what kinds of jobs are available or how to get one. He's also starting to get hungry, so he can't afford to be picky about it unless he wants to end up begging on the street. He gets up and yells out that he has no money and is looking for a job, but as he is yelling, one guy comes up to him and tells him to stop. He says if Veltal wants work, he should go to the commercial guild with his citizen ID, but Veltal has never heard of a citizen ID, so the guy assumes he must be an immigrant. Since it's clear that Veltal doesn't know anything about the city, the man informs him that this is his turf, so Veltal can't be doing stuff like this out here. Veltal hadn't realized he was encroaching on someone else's territory, so he apologizes and turns to leave, but before he does, the man hands him an application form and tells him to take it to the commercial guild so he can apply for a job there. It won't guarantee that he gets anything, but it's better than having nothing. Also, he warns Veltal not to get involved with any companies under the IHMI company, especially construction-related, because they are incredibly exploitative and laugh in the face of safety regulations. Veltal takes the man's advice and thanks him for the help, so he heads to the commercial guild in search of employment. However, once he gets there, the interviewer isn't too enthusiastic about employing him. On his application, Veltal wrote down wide-scale annihilation magic as one of his special skills, and he also wrote down dungeon creation and experience leading a nation 500 years ago. So the interviewer calmly puts down his application and tells Veltal that there are no positions available for him. Besides, since Veltal doesn't have a familia, he isn't eligible for hire anyway. After Veltal returns home, he is feeling really depressed about not getting a job, so he lays on Makina's lap and asks her if he is really incapable of doing anything in this world, but she assures him that he is still superior to everyone else, so she tells him he should just let her do the working from now on. However, Veltal refuses to sit idle, so he asks Makina if there is anyone she can contact for assistance, and now that she thinks about it, there is someone she can call. Veltal is surprised that Makina actually has a friend in this era, but Makina wouldn't exactly call the person a friend. They do go shopping together, eat, play, and sleep over sometimes, but that's about it. Veltal is confused because they sound exactly like a friend to him, but Makina still refuses to acknowledge it. A little while later, they meet Makina's friend in a nearby cafe, and it turns out to be a hacker girl Veltal had met yesterday. She introduces herself properly to Veltal and says her name is Takahashi, but even though Makina had mentioned how the Great Demon Lord would one day be revived, she never actually thought she would be able to meet him in the flesh. She starts poking Veltal to make sure he is real, and Makina yells at her not to be disrespectful, but Veltal says it's fine since he is the one asking her for assistance here. Veltal asks how Takahashi and Makina met, so Takahashi starts explaining that she met Makina on a Doujin site, but after seeing the look on Makina's face, she realizes that she probably shouldn't tell Veltal about Makina's search history, so she tells him to forget about it. Just then, Veltal notices the familia on Takahashi's neck, so he reaches over to inspect it, which freaks Takahashi out, but she lets him finish what he's doing. Veltal apologizes for startling her, but he noticed that Takahashi's familia was different from Makina's, so he was looking into how it is built and how it functions. Takahashi is surprised that Veltal can do all that just by touching it. So Makina explains that Veltal has a Sage Eye ability that allows him to use the flow of mana to understand the composition of any object he touches. He has a general idea of how a familia works, but there are still a lot of components he can't fully analyze yet. However, that's a problem for another day because the reason they are here right now is to ask if Takahashi can introduce Veltal to some kind of work. She asks why Veltal doesn't just go to the commercial guild, but he already tried that, and they rejected him for not having a familia. And due to a certain CDO's vendetta against him, Veltal can't have a familia installed, so they were hoping Takahashi would have some ideas. Takahashi thinks about it for a second, and Veltal is a young-looking, 500-year-old demon lord with a great voice, a handsome face, and no familia. Yeah, there's only one clear option available, so it has been decided that Veltal will become a streamer. Takahashi explained that streamers post videos of themselves doing stuff online, for which they receive money from ad revenue or donations. She even has some leftover equipment from when she used to stream, although it will be a little outdated. But if he becomes popular, he can just buy new equipment for himself. Makina says she is firmly against the idea of Veltal becoming a streamer because the job is extremely unstable and risky. She thinks it would be much better if he got a reliable job like flipping burgers, but Takahashi thinks this could be a great opportunity for him. Veltal has a great voice, great looks, and an incredible aura, so he fits all the markers for becoming a star, and when she puts it like that, Makina can't deny that Veltal is charming, but she still isn't sure this is a good idea. There are some games he wouldn't be able to play without a familia, but he could always just stick to the games that still use physical controls. And most people don't even watch because of the game anymore, they'd just be watching to see Veltal do stuff. Makina asks him what he thinks about all this, and given the fact that he doesn't have many options available to him, he agrees to go along with Takahashi's idea. Later that day, Makina was taking a bath while Veltal did some research about this world's internet, and it doesn't take him long to figure out how it works. It allows people to spread information faster than anything he has ever seen, but as a result of all this access, people either resort to watching cat videos or doing degenerate shit online. He believes it should be easy enough for him to sway public opinion in his favor with this, but all of a sudden, Makina finishes her bath and walks out completely naked. Once she realizes what just happened, she gets dressed and apologizes to Veltal for being so inconsiderate. She has lived alone for so long that it became a habit, but Veltal tells her that there's nothing to be sorry about because he actually thought her body was quite beautiful, although he still thinks his own body is better. A couple hours later, Takahashi arrived at Makina's house with all her old equipment so she can help Veltal set it up. And once it's done, she hands him the controller so he can try out some games. She tries explaining the controls to him, but Veltal tells her there's no need since he already knows exactly how it works. Something like this is much easier to analyze than a familia, so he starts scrolling through the game library and settles on Bloodborne. Takahashi remembers how so many people rage quit because the game was too difficult, but she's sure Veltal's analysis skills will make this easy for him. However, as Veltal starts up the game, he couldn't even make it past the intro. This is a lot harder than he thought it would be, and even after a few hours of gameplay, he still hasn't made much progress, so Takahashi tells him straight up that he sucks at it. Makina thinks Takahashi is being rude, but Veltal is well aware that he sucks at this. He understands the mechanics, he just can't seem to master it, so Makina is a little worried that he won't be able to stream after all. On the contrary, Takahashi thinks this will actually work out great for Veltal's online image, because the only thing the internet loves more than a hot guy is a hot guy who fails confidently. But before that, Takahashi says they need to work on Veltal's introductory greeting. Veltal asks if he can just introduce himself normally, but Takahashi tells him that that's not an option. There are already over 5 million streamers in the world, and barely 1% of those streamers actually make enough money to survive, so if Veltal wants to get into the business, he has to think of a way to leave an impression on as many people as possible with his greeting. Takahashi seems to think the greeting is a really big deal, so Veltal asks Makina if she has any ideas on what he could use as a greeting. Makina thinks about it for a second, and she thinks it would be best if he just adapted one of his warden declarations and used that. Veltal gives it a try, and the declaration is basically him telling the foolish mortals that they should be honored to be in his presence, and it's dramatic, so Takahashi thinks it's a good start, but it still isn't very attention-grabbing, so they will have to think of something to add to it. In the meantime, Takahashi says she will give Veltal a crash course on everything he needs to know about streaming. Basically, he's going to need to stream every day, even if no one is watching, and no matter what he does, he has to avoid talking about any erotic or racist stuff, because that'll get him banned quicker than Asmongold. Most important of all, while Veltal is streaming, Makina has to make sure she never gets caught on camera, because they can't have people thinking she's his girlfriend. As a friendly gesture, Takahashi asks one of her friends to help promote his stream, but he owes her a favor after this. Time goes on, and Veltal starts becoming more and more popular, but when the trolls inevitably invade his stream, he is absolutely unfazed and even encourages them to keep roasting him. It doesn't matter to him since he gains power from having others think about him, so even negative publicity works out in his favor. Before long, through hard work and determination, Veltal reaches 1 million views, and for his latest stream, he will be playing Bloodborne 3 non-stop until he clears it. However, while he does this, there's a camera being pointed at Makina's house, and it captures the moment Makina gets home from work. As Makina enters, Veltal has just successfully cleared the game, so he is celebrating his victory, and many of his fans congratulate him on it. He had improved a lot after finishing the first and second Bloodborne games, but this was still insanely difficult to beat, and he's glad he got through it. He thanks all his fans and haters for sticking with him until he was done, but with that said, he has to end the stream for today. Once he is done, Veltal breathes a sigh of relief, and Makina opens the door to check if he needs anything. Veltal says he's fine and he's going to head out because he has a package he wants to pick up. Makina offers to go pick up his package for him instead, but Veltal has been looking for an excuse to move around for a while, so Makina says she will have dinner ready for him by the time he gets back. He heads out into the city, and as he walks through the slums, he talks about how distorted and trained the social structures are in this city. However, as he continues to walk, he is shocked to come across a familiar face sitting on the side of the road. The hero Graham. Back in the day, Graham was a kind brother and was taking care of his little sister, Melina, who had fallen ill. He comforted her and said he would head out to gather some medicinal herbs to help her recover, but as he was about to leave, his father called out to him and handed him a sword. He had heard that there were monsters active in the forest, so he wants Graham to take the sword so he can protect himself if he runs into anything dangerous. His mother is also worried about his safety, so she says a small prayer for him before he leaves, and Graham thanks both of them for their consideration. He went out into the forest that day, and the herb gathering went smoothly, but as he was returning home, he ran into an army of lizardmen under the leadership of Zanol, one of Veltal's generals. Since he was hidden, he didn't have to fight them, but he wondered what they could possibly be doing in such a remote location. To his horror, when he returned home, he discovered that his home, along with his entire family, had been burnt to the ground. And from that day forward, he swore that he would get his revenge on Veltal. But right now, he has a dazed look in his eyes, and he is seated next to his sworn enemy. Veltal begins talking about this udon shop and assures Graham that this is one of the best joints around, but Graham doesn't have much to say about that. Veltal tries to keep the conversation going and says that the food of this world is far better than it was back in his day, and Graham agrees, but he still doesn't have much to say. The food finally arrives and they are both about to eat, but Graham finally says something and talks about how strange it feels to be slurping noodles while seated next to the enemy who killed his family and friends. Veltal feels the same way since Graham single-handedly killed several of Veltal's vassals, but right now, he bears no hatred towards Graham at all. He's just curious to know how Graham managed to survive this long when he's immortal. The only explanation would be if Graham somehow became immortal, but that would go against his entire ideology of making the most out of a limited lifespan. Graham explains that he didn't give up his mortality, rather, as a reward for defeating Veltal, the goddess Meldia gifted him with the blessing of eternal youth, and while that blessing has allowed him to live this long, it doesn't make him immortal. Veltal comments that goddess Meldia must have been quite fond of him, so he can imagine her granting him such a blessing. After Graham ended the war with the Immortals, Immortals began starting wars among themselves again, so he was ordered to go out to the battlefield and slay the same mortals he had once fought to save. And even after the Civil War had ended, the people turned their hatred towards Graham for some reason. Veltal believes an outcome like that was inevitable since people naturally fear individuals with great power. Graham was exiled from the kingdom, so he was forced to wander for centuries until Fantasia happened and the worlds became fused. Since then, he has killed so many mortals and immortals that he believes there is no place for him left in this world as a hero. He asks Veltal why he sought to rule the world in the first place, so Veltal answers that he was trying to achieve world peace. There are several ways one can become an immortal, like phoenixes, curses, or blessings, so aside from a few rare exceptions, all immortals used to be mortal at some point. Still, mortals constantly ostracized and persecuted immortals because they were different, and the immortals were no better because they did the exact same thing to the mortals. The lesson Veltal took from this was that no matter what you are, people will always hate and fear that which is different. So he believed that the only way to bring about world peace was to stand at the top of the world and rule it to make sure no one had to suffer such persecution. Graham doesn't believe peace through world domination would work, but he also can't deny that people left on their own will never achieve peace because he has experienced the senseless persecution and wars firsthand. Even so, he still refuses to admit that Veltal is right, so Veltal accepts that Graham will never agree with him. Graham gets up to leave and thanks Veltal for the noodles, but before he goes, he tells Veltal that he is glad he got the chance to speak with him. Veltal gets up to leave as well, and while walking down the street, he notices Takahashi down in an alley, and she seems to be in some kind of trouble. She apparently hired this ogre for a job, but now he is trying to extort twice the pay from her. Takahashi tells him he's stupid if he thinks she's going to give him that much money, but the ogre is totally prepared to beat her up if he doesn't get what he wants, so he raises his hand and is about to punch her. However, Veltal grabs his arm and tells him to leave Takahashi alone. He is feeling generous today, so he is willing to overlook the ogre's disrespect, but the ogre recognizes Veltal as the guy he beat up a while ago, so he isn't scared of him. He says he's going to kill Veltal this time, so Takahashi tries telling Veltal to run before he gets hurt, but Veltal says it's fine since he has been meaning to test out how much power he has regained from his 1 million subscribers. As the ogre tries to punch him, Veltal stretches out his hand and catches the punch, but then the ogre activates wind magic and completely shatters Veltal's arm. However, with his powers partially restored, Veltal is able to regenerate his arm instantly and flicks the ogre into a pile of trash. The guy's out cold and Veltal is honestly disappointed since he was expecting more of a fight. Takahashi comes up to him and asks if he is alright, and Veltal says he is perfectly fine, but he wants to know who that guy was and why he was attacking her. Takahashi explains that he was supposed to be her bodyguard for a big job today, but all of a sudden, he started making ridiculous demands. He didn't know the guy was supposed to be her bodyguard, so he apologizes for knocking him out, but Takahashi says it's alright since she just found someone even better. She asked Veltal to become her bodyguard for the day, and she even offers to pay him for it too. So since he owes her a favor, Veltal agrees. Takahashi leads him to the location and tells him that she is trying to steal something from this warehouse, so she needs him to create a distraction while she gets it. Veltal says he understands the objective, but before Takahashi can give him any more instructions, he gets up and despite Takahashi trying to stop him, he has already kicked down the door to a major Yakuza operation. Veltal doesn't really know what he's supposed to be doing here, so he asks Takahashi over the comms if the cube in the table is the target. Takahashi tells him it is, but she's also confused as to how he's communicating with her since he doesn't have a familia. Veltal proudly states that he just copied the communication ether that the familia produces so it can reproduce the feature of magic. Anyway, since there aren't that many enemies here, Veltal says he will subdue them and claim the cube for Takahashi, but before he does anything, she asks him to make sure he doesn't kill anyone. Veltal agrees to hold back, so before the fight begins, he announces himself using his stream greeting. However, none of the Yakuza members have seen his stream, so it just makes things really awkward. If there are still people who don't recognize him, Veltal is going to have to work a lot harder to make his name known. But for now, his million subscribers worth of power should be more than enough to take these guys down. The Yakuza are still confused about what's going on, but they assume Veltal must just be some crazy guy, so one of them pulls out a magic gun and fires it at him. However, Veltal isn't fazed by this and uses strengthening magic on himself so he can deflect the bullets. Once the Yakuza member runs out of ammo, Veltal goes on the offensive and begins knocking the Yakuza members out one after the other with minimal effort. The Yakuza member with a magic gun switches to a regular gun since it's faster than reloading, but just before he shoots, Takahashi takes control of his vision and displays an illusion that tricks the Yakuza member into shooting his partner. Veltal then knocks the last guy out, and with all of them unconscious, the mission is practically over. Veltal goes over to one of the Yakuza members and begins inspecting their gun, which uses some kind of card as ammunition. Takahashi is impressed with how easily Veltal took out those Yakuza, but they should really grab the box and get out of here before they get themselves into more trouble than they accounted for. She says she is on her way to meet up with Veltal, but he tells her to stay where she is because it looks like trouble just arrived. Whatever it is, it begins attacking Veltal, all it's covered with some sort of invisibility cloak, so to even the playing field, Veltal uses the magic gun to blast the cloak off, revealing a giant mech suit. Takahashi recognizes this as 4th generation Makina gear, and it couldn't possibly belong to the Yakuza because these things are far too expensive for them to own. This is the first time Veltal has ever seen something like this before, and he is eager to test his strength against it, so he begins by firing the magic gun at it. Predictably, the magic gun does absolutely nothing against the giant mech, but the assailant decides to follow Veltal's lead and pulls out a magic gun of his own. But his is a lot more powerful. He tries to shoot Veltal, but Veltal is too quick for him and manages to sneak into a blind spot above the mech. By the time the assailant finally locates and locks onto him, Veltal is already in position and fires a powerful blast of his straight at the mech. At full power, he could have easily one-shot the mech, but while Veltal's blast was certainly strong at his current power level, he knows it was nowhere near strong enough to defeat a foe like the mech. Although that doesn't mean he can't win this fight, because if blasts don't work, he will just have to go for close combat, so he summons a sword. The mech matches Veltal and converts its gun into a sword, so the two charge at each other and clash in a magnificent display of strength and animation budget. Veltal is having a lot of fun with this fight. As things drag on, the mech gets serious, and before Veltal even realizes what's going on, his arm gets chopped off and he gets beheaded. With Veltal seemingly dead, the guy in the mech begins to report that his target has been eliminated. But then the guy freaks out because Veltal's decapitated head starts talking to him. Veltal praises him for being skilled enough to behead the Demon Lord, but he still lacks the combat experience to know that you always double tap your enemy to make sure they are dead. In any case, Veltal believes the guy deserves a reward for fighting so well, so Veltal says he will allow the mech pilot the honor of witnessing the strongest weapon within his arsenal. A terrifying aura is emanated as Veltal summons the great sword, Vernal, and the mech pilot is so stunned that he can barely move. He has never fought anyone who possessed such strength, and he is completely defenseless as Veltal cuts his limbs off one by one until he falls to the ground with only one leg left. Veltal made sure to avoid hitting any vital organs, so the guy inside there should still be alive, and he plans to interrogate him, but before he does, the guy in the mech sends one final report back to HQ, saying he failed to eliminate the target and failed to retrieve the objective, so he will now be executing code 8090. And if you're wondering what 8090 means, let's just say there was a gun installed in the helmet of the suit to make sure the pilot can't be interrogated. After that's over, Takahashi comes out of her hiding spot and she's glad Veltal is alright, but it was really freaky to see him get his head chopped off. Although Veltal doesn't seem to think it was a big deal. He's more surprised that weaponry exists that could enhance an individual's power to such an extent, so he says this time period is truly terrifying. However, Takahashi thinks Veltal is the terrifying one because he just single-handedly destroyed a Makina gear, and these things are strong enough to wipe out entire countries if needed. This also happens to be one made by Marcus's company, and Takahashi knows the Yakuza would never be able to get their hands on one of the suits, so she's starting to worry that this mission might be more trouble than she bargained for. That aside, Veltal is still curious why they went through so much effort just to acquire a cube, so Takahashi explains to him that the cube is actually a storage device, and what her client is after is the information inside the cube. Takahashi says they can take a look at data if Veltal wants, so she pulls out a cube reader and places the cube on it. At first, the only thing that appears is a blank page, but after a little tweaking from Takahashi, the cube opens up and a list of names appears on the list. Takahashi has no idea what to make of this list of names, but Veltal recognizes the people on this list to be his immortal subjects. This is concerning, so Takahashi says she will contact her client so she can find out what the list is about, but unfortunately, her client isn't answering his phone. So they are going to have to go meet him in person if they want to discuss this. Takahashi leads Veltal to the massive apartment building where her client is and says the guy they are looking for is up on the 13th floor. As they walk up to the front door, Takahashi uses her hacking skills to bypass the security system so they are allowed entry even though they aren't residents here, and she is really proud of herself for it too since there's no security system out there that she can't bypass. As Veltal and Takahashi get in the elevator, Takahashi is about to push the elevator button, but Veltal stops her and says he wants to do it instead. Takahashi doesn't mind letting him push the button, but she asks why he wants to do it, and Veltal doesn't really have a reason for it, he just likes pushing buttons. He begins pushing the button for the 13th floor, but Takahashi forgot to mention that this elevator doesn't allow you to get to the 13th floor directly. First, you'd have to go to the second floor, then the 17th, then back to the 4th, and so on until you eventually get to the 13th floor. Since they are here, Veltal starts walking out of the elevator, but Takahashi tells him to wait since her client Eiju is a pretty paranoid guy, so he had dozens of traps laid across the entire floor, and if Veltal accidentally sets one of the traps off, he's going to become minced meat. Veltal appreciates the warning, but as far as he can tell, there are no traps in this room. Although, it would be more accurate to say that all the physical and magical traps have been disarmed. Takahashi is surprised that Veltal could figure that out so easily, but part of his duties as Demon Lord included building and maintaining dungeons, so discerning the layout of traps is a trivial matter for him. They continue walking until they finally get to Eiju's front door and Takahashi rings the bell, but surprisingly, he doesn't answer. Takahashi can understand him ignoring phone calls, but he usually always answers his front door. However, upon closer inspection, Veltal realizes that the door isn't even locked in the first place. This raises a red flag for Takahashi since Eiju would never do something as careless as leave his front door unlocked. Veltal suggests they should proceed with caution since they don't know what they will find in there, so Takahashi leads the way and heads towards Eiju's workroom. There she finds Eiju in his chair, but when she gets a little closer to him, she discovers that he is drenched in blood and completely lifeless. Takahashi freaks out at first, but Veltal calms her down and goes over to inspect the body. He remembers seeing this guy's face somewhere before, although he was wearing a bunch of trash at the time. Takahashi says that sounds like something Eiju would do since he would often dress as a hobo whenever he went out to gather information. There's an obvious stab wound in Eiju's chest and another one in his neck, but judging from the state of the blood around him, Veltal assumes it has only been a few days since Eiju was killed. A man like Eiju may have had many enemies, but the way he was murdered was too efficient for it to have been done out of hatred. It is way more likely that a hitman was hired to take Eiju out, especially since the killer went through the effort of destroying Eiju's familia. Someone must be trying to cover up whatever information Eiju had. It probably had something to do with the job Takahashi accepted from him, but it's not like they can get any information from him now that he's dead. Takahashi thinks for a second and begins searching around Eiju's room, because a seasoned information broker/hacker would definitely hide some sort of offline storage devices nearby for extra data security. After searching for a bit, she discovers a laptop in a hidden desk drawer, and this looks like it might have the answers they are looking for, but when she turns it on, she finds all the files in a corrupted mess. It may look that way, but Veltal notices that the files are all arranged in a very specific order, so Takahashi is able to compile until she uncovers a video. Eiju made this video in case he was killed before he could complete his investigation, and he didn't know who would end up watching it. But he wanted to make sure at least one person knew the truth because the prosperity of this city was built upon terrifying evil. All the power in this city relies on the Aether reactor in the center of the city, but with the enormous scale of the city, the reactor would need at least 10 mana ley lines to draw power from in order to meet the energy demands. However, there are only 2 ley lines in this area, yet the reactor never seems to run out of energy, so it stands to reason that the reactor is drawing power from another source. And this secondary power source is called the Immortal Furnace Project. Essentially, the furnace burns the souls of immortals like firewood and converts the resulting energy into ether for the city. And since immortals are higher beings, a single immortal's soul produces a lot of energy, way more than the souls of thousands of mortals would ever be able to generate. The data Eiju found showed that Marcus's company employed desperate homeless people as construction workers for the Immortal Furnace, but once construction was done, all the workers suddenly disappeared, and Eiju believes they were all killed so they could be fed to the furnace as well. One of the first immortals to be fed to the furnace was one of Veltal's close subordinates, Zenol, and this greatly angers Veltal. The whole immortal hunt was a scheme by Marcus to turn the world against immortals so people would accept their execution, and he could burn immortal souls in the furnace, although the public was never made aware that this was how he killed them. Recently, Marcus made a deal to buy information about some immortals from the Yakuza, and that probably means he's running low on immortal souls to burn, so he's looking for new victims. If the furnace runs out of immortal fuel, then the heart of the city would cease to exist as people know it. But even so, Eiju thinks it's wrong that innocent immortals are being sacrificed to power the city. After the video ends, Takahashi is enraged by the revelation that immortals are being treated so badly, but there's not much she can do about it since even if she were to try and publicize this information, it is likely she would just end up dead just like Eiju over here. Veltal tells her that this is a problem for immortals, and as the king of immortals, it is his duty to do something about it, so she doesn't need to burden herself with this. For now, they decide to inform city officials of Eju's death so he can receive a proper burial. And as they leave, Veltal tries to contact Makina so he can inform her of the Immortal Furnace. But to his horror, she isn't responding to his calls. Something must have happened to her. While Veltal was busy on his errand, Makina looked in the fridge to see what she could make for dinner by the time he got back, but it was still the same stuff in there as last time. On the bright side, Alec tells her she should be able to make some good curry with the ingredients she's got on hand. Just then, the doorbell rings, so she gets up to go answer it. But to her utter disgust and disappointment, it turns out to be Marcus. After what Marcus has done, the only appropriate response is violence on sight, so Makina hits him with a massive burst of fire. Marcus is engulfed in flames and sent flying backwards. But he is just as immortal as she is, so a little fire isn't going to be enough to end him. Makina completely transforms and steps out of the house to face him because she already knows he's up to no good. Before the fight begins, Makina disconnects her familia from the network so Marcus won't be able to access it, and after that, the two of them begin launching magic weapon attacks at each other. It looks like it's been fairly even so far, but then while Marcus is distracted, Makina gets in close and grabs onto one of his arms, causing it to explode and come off entirely. She managed to catch Marcus off guard with that one, but a few seconds later, he has already regenerated his arm. He then casts a bloody sword rain area attack and causes a massive explosion of his own, but thanks to the shield Makina put up, she was completely unharmed. However, she can't say the same for the house since she doesn't have fire insurance. Just then, Marcus's secretary leaps out of the smoke and tries to finish Makina off with a sneak attack, but Makina is too quick for her, so the only thing the secretary slashes is an illusion. Makina had expected Marcus to be too cowardly to come alone, so she prepares a spell to burn the secretary to ash. However, before she can complete it, Marcus calls out Codebreaker, and all of a sudden, Makina's familia stops working. This leaves Makina disoriented, so the secretary takes advantage of the opening and stabs Makina through the chest while she's distracted. Makina collapses to the ground and she isn't getting back up anytime soon. Now that the fight is over, the secretary scolds Marcus for being acting so recklessly since Makina could have easily killed her back there. And all this fighting could have been avoided if Marcus had simply disabled Makina's familia from the start. As the two stand over Makina's motionless body, Makina glares at Marcus, but Marcus is actually enjoying it because he loves seeing Makina in such a pitiful state. Makina asks him what he did to her, so Marcus explains that he simply shut her familia down. Makina didn't think it would be possible for him to do since she disconnected her familia from the internet before the fight started, and normally she would have been right, but Marcus's familia is somewhat special. It's a new prototype that was designed specifically to be more advanced than the modern familias. All modern familias have an inbuilt backdoor that allows access to the system, and as the director of IHMI, he has admin access to every familia in the city, so he can forcibly shut any familia down if he chooses to. That means that no one can defeat him since he can shut down all familia users, and you would outclass all non-familia users in casting speed, and if no one is capable of defeating him, then that means he is the strongest in the world. That may be true, but Makina doesn't understand why Marcus is so obsessed with being the strongest since he has nothing to gain from it. But Marcus has his reasons. He wants to become the new demon lord, and he doesn't intend to achieve that status through brute force like Veltal did. In this era, all you need is information and technology, so if you control those, then you control the world. However, controlling the world from behind the scenes would be too boring for someone like him, so he intends to absolutely dominate the world. Far more than Veltal ever managed to dominate during his prime. Just then, the secretary reminds Marcus that they didn't schedule any time for a monologue, so they are running late on his next appointment. Marcus decides to wrap things up here quickly, so it's time for Makina to become fuel for the Immortal Furnace. By the time Veltal and Takahashi return home, they find the entire place destroyed with no traces of Makina whatsoever. The only thing left is a scorched game controller, and Veltal is absolutely devastated because Makina was the person he cared for the most in this world. He's completely zoned out in grief, so Takahashi asks him if he's alright and Veltal snaps back to reality. They aren't going to solve anything by standing around, so Veltal asks if there's any information about what happened here. According to the social media reports, people are speculating that some sort of explosion took place, but the details are pretty hazy, so there's no way of knowing how much of it is actually true. Veltal wishes there were some way for him to at least figure out where Makina is right now, but since they are unable to contact her directly, Takahashi looks for another way to locate Makina, and it's going to involve the drones. Since this place is a slum, there aren't a lot of security drones passing throughout, but there are a lot of delivery drones though, and those drones have cameras on them, so all she needs to do is hack into their systems and take a look at the video data. Within a few moments, Takahashi gains access to the drone systems, and from the video feed, they can see the battle that took place here, and that Marcus was the one behind it. They can't tell what Marcus was saying, but after defeating Makina, he and his secretary took her and drove to a restricted section of the city reactor. And that can only mean that he intends to burn Makina's soul to power the city. Veltal thanks Takahashi for the valuable information and starts walking in the direction of the reactor, but Takahashi tells him to wait and think this through. She understands why he would want to rush in there to save Makina before it's too late, but that reactor is the most secure location in the entire city and has dozens of Magino gears patrolling the area, so Veltal won't be able to handle it on his own. And while Takahashi can certainly help him get there, she isn't much of a fighter, so he would need to find someone who's strong enough to help him. But Veltal doesn't have many remaining allies in this era, although there is one person he can think of who might be perfect for this rescue operation. Veltal later goes to meet with Graham, and at first, Graham wants nothing to do with him. But when he sees the proud Veltal kneel before him and ask for help, he decides to at least hear him out. Veltal explains everything he has learnt about the city's ether reactor, and Graham had always suspected that something wrong was going on there. But now that he knows the truth, he's absolutely appalled by the despicable nature of the project. Veltal pleads with Graham to assist him in storming the reactor because he knows he cannot save Makina as he is right now, but Graham seems more annoyed than sympathetic. Veltal's subordinates killed Graham's family, Veltal himself waged dozens of wars and killed millions of people, and now he is bowing his head to his sworn enemy just to save the life of one immortal woman. He finds this to be utterly shameless. Graham does not like the fact that this city is built upon the deaths of innocent people, but at the same time, that reactor is the heart of this city, so if he were to agree to help Veltal destroy it, then the entire city would be plunged into darkness, and the lives of millions of people would be ruined. He asks if Veltal is planning to destroy the lives of everyone just to save one person, but Veltal laughs at the idea of such a short-sighted plan. He is no fool, so he has obviously thought about the consequences of his actions, and that's why he intends to both save Makina and fix the problems of this city. However, right now he does not possess the power or support necessary to do so, so he has no choice but to humbly ask his former enemy for help, and the confidence behind Veltal's words convinces Graham to get up and act as a hero once more. However, he makes it extremely clear that he is not doing this to help Veltal, and he still hasn't forgiven all the atrocities Veltal committed centuries ago, but there's a kidnapped woman whose soul is about to be burnt, so he agrees to temporarily join forces for the sake of justice, although it still feels strange to be teaming up with the Demon Lord. A little while later, Takahashi manages to find a way for the two of them to get into the reactor without having to go through the restricted area, so she leads them to a hidden entrance. Apparently, this was used to transport all the materials that were used to build the reactor, but even if this path will eventually lead them to the reactor, Veltal says they don't have enough time to clear a maze like this. On the other hand, Graham thinks it will be child's play to clear this maze, since he has done it so many times in the past. He casts a spell called auto mapping, and within a few seconds, a detailed map of the maze begins to appear in his hand. Veltal has never seen a spell like this before, so Graham explains that it's a unique one he came up with during his time as an adventurer. But that just makes Veltal angry because he put a lot of effort into building those dungeons back in the day, and it turns out Graham was just cheating his way through it. He accuses Graham of having no pride as an adventurer, but Graham says an adventurer's pride has nothing to do with this, since his goal was always to get through dungeons as quickly as possible, so he couldn't care less if Veltal's traps and tricks went to waste because he had a map. Takahashi is getting sick of all their arguing, so she yells at them to quiet down and take the mission seriously because they still need to rescue Makina. The two of them realize they were being really childish, so they both apologize to Takahashi and promise to focus on the task at hand. A few moments later, Graham finishes creating the map, and with this, they will be able to make their way through this maze without getting lost. Veltal asks if Graham is sure they can trust the map, and Graham confirms it, adding that his mapping magic can also detect traps and enemies. But this maze doesn't seem to have any security measures, so it should be fine for them to take the shortest path to the reactor. As the two of them head towards the reactor, Veltal calls Takahashi to apologize again for his outburst earlier. Takahashi is still a little pissed about it, but as long as Veltal stays on task from now on, she's willing to overlook it. He asks her how her end of the plan is going so far, and she says she is making steady progress. But what she's working on will take a lot of time to get ready, so she's not sure if she will be able to get it done by the time the two of them make it down to the reactor room. If she ends up needing more time, Veltal and Graham are going to have to keep the enemies busy for a while to compensate, and Veltal understands that. As they descend, the ambient ether becomes more and more dense and communication with Takahashi gets choppy, so before she gets cut off, she tells him she will finish making the preparations. Veltal takes a deep breath to prepare himself for what lies ahead, and Graham comments that he can tell that Veltal has grown stronger than he was in the past. Veltal doesn't know what he's talking about since he is clearly nowhere near the strength he had during his prime, but that's not what Graham was talking about. Veltal was able to lower his head to this sworn enemy in order to save his subordinate, but the old Veltal would have let Makina burn before he bowed to anyone. That shows that Veltal's strength of character is greater than ever before, and if he had been like this when they had their showdown all those years ago, then the results might have been different. As the lift arrives at the destination, Veltal and Graham are confronted by Marcus's secretary, and she's been expecting them since Marcus knew Veltal would eventually show up. Marcus has Makina restrained and is holding her near the core of the reactor, and he seems to be taking great pleasure in the fact that he's about to kill a former comrade. After Veltal was revived, Marcus did a little digging into those around him and research, and that's when he discovered that Makina was still around and kicking. Over the years, with the immortal hunts he had orchestrated, he's caused the deaths of many immortals, so he never could have imagined that Makina was still alive and laying low within the city. He explains to her that this place is known as the Immortal Furnace, and as the name suggests, it basically burns the souls of immortals as fuel to generate ether, which in turn fuels the city. At first, Makina is a bit confused by Marcus' monologue, but then she remembers that two of her subordinates are still missing, so she pieces together that Marcus must have kidnapped and fed them to the Immortal Furnace. Marcus recalls those two and tells Makina all about how concerned the two of them looked for one another as their souls were burnt up, and this enrages her to such an extent that she unleashes a large torrent of flames, but Marcus simply puts up a shield and remains unharmed. He further taunts Makina, reminding her of her fellow dark peers, Zenol, and informing her that he was the first immortal to be fed to the furnace. Marcus even enjoyed hearing Zenol's screams of agony so much that he recorded it and turned it into a mixtape. Makina asks him if he intends to use her as fuel as well, but that should be pretty obvious by now. The last immortal they stuck in the furnace is about to burn out, and Marcus can afford to let the reactor run out of power since it's the cornerstone of this city. Normally, he would have just sent people out to find more immortals, but if what he is doing were to become public knowledge, there would be a bunch of annoying people talking about things like immortal rights, and he doesn't want to have to deal with that, which is why he went to retrieve Makina personally. Since she's one of the dark peers, her soul should be strong enough to burn for a couple of years, so Marcus won't have to worry about refueling for a while, but he's probably going to have to start looking into alternative power sources at some point. While Marcus is still monologuing, his secretary faces off against Veltal and Graham. She tells Veltal that she was assigned to stand guard and delay him long enough for Marcus to get through his evil monologue and feed Makina to the furnace. She didn't think Veltal would have the guts to show up though, and not only did he come, but he brought a friend along. And that friend happens to be none other than the hero Graham. Graham is surprised that there are people in this era who still know of him, but the secretary just recognizes him from the files they have in their database. She finds it interesting that the demon lord and the hero are working together, but she's still got a job to do, so she won't let them pass without a fight. Graham tells Veltal to go on ahead while he keeps the secretary busy, but Veltal warns him that he should be careful because from what he has seen, this secretary's skills are on par with Zenol the Karmic Swords. But while that may be an impressive feat for her, Graham recalls overwhelmingly defeating Zenol in pure swordsmanship during the Immortal War, so if her skills are anything similar, he isn't worried about losing to her. The secretary takes offense to this statement, so she decides to show Graham what she can do and dashes behind him to launch a surprise attack. Graham is caught off guard by her incredible speed, but before her sword strikes him, he manages to guard himself and prevent any injuries. While he does this, Veltal starts sprinting away so he can rescue Makina, and as much as the secretary wants to stop him, she's not going to be able to slip past Graham without a fight. Before Veltal leaves, he tells Graham to make sure he doesn't die, and then he jumps down the center line of the reactor to make it to the core as fast as possible. The secretary really needs to stop Veltal, so she decides to take Graham down as quickly as possible and regroup with Marcus, and to do that, she activates her zero base gear. There is a blinding flash of light, and before Graham realizes what's going on, he gets hit and is knocked all the way into a wall. He looks down at the secretary, and she is now wearing a full set of Magino gear, and not just regular Magino gear either. This is a prototype next-gen version that has yet to be released. It is more efficient, quicker, and most importantly, it fits better, so the secretary's curves won't go to waste. However, there is still one flaw with the design because the operational time of this suit is entirely dependent on the user's magical reserves, but the secretary isn't going to let this fight last long enough for her magic to run out. She dashes forward, and now she's even faster than she was before, so as she lands in the wall behind Graham, he barely has enough time to raise his sword and block before he gets knocked through the floor. The secretary tells him that he should be honored to face such a marvel of modern engineering, but Graham isn't interested in hearing her go into another marketing pitch. The secretary calls Graham a relic of the past since his sword, armor, and even his familia are all outdated, and as such, she is sure she will be able to claim victory with her cutting-edge techniques and equipment. Graham tells her that fancy equipment and training don't guarantee victory in a match because at the end of the day you either win or you lose, and the secretary agrees, but then again, her fancy equipment is pretty fancy. She slashes at Graham with such speed that he is barely able to react and block before he is hit, but then he sees her sheath her sword again, and the second she does, she unleashes yet another lightning speed slash. However, this time Graham was prepared for it, and he is able to block it much more comfortably. Even so, he still can't find any openings in her defenses, so he admits that the level of advancement this era has achieved is truly frightening. The secretary tries dashing behind him to attack once more, but Graham has seen that already, so he parries her attacks and kicks her away. But he can tell that he didn't do much damage due to the toughness of her armor. He hasn't made much progress against her in this fight, but he has at least figured out one thing about her attack pattern. He says she can only use that lightning-fast attack of hers when her sword is fully sheathed, and the secretary confirms that he is correct, but simply discovering that doesn't mean he can beat her. With her Magino gear and incredible attack speed, her victory is pretty much guaranteed, and she's grown tired of wasting time here, so she's going to finish this quickly. She begins repeatedly attacking Graham with her lightning blade, but he seems to have gotten used to the speed, so he's able to dodge her attacks fairly easily. And even when he gets hit, he takes almost no damage and recovers immediately before landing on his feet. The secretary charges at him again, but this time, while their blades are locked, she tries to hack into Graham's familia to shut his body down. But for some reason, she can't gain access, so she assumes Graham must have implemented some safeguards against hacking. If she can't hack into his familia, this is going to be a lot harder than she anticipated, but she is still confident that she can win nonetheless. However, while she's in the middle of saying this, Graham decides to go offensive, so he steps on her sword to hold her in place and casts an earth glaive that sends shards of rock flying at her. The secretary manages to free herself without much trouble, but Graham hasn't finished yet. In the next second, he casts an ice spell to freeze the rocks in place along with the secretary, and while he knows it won't be enough to hold her for long, he just needed her to stay in one place long enough for him to get close and multi-layer cast a fireball at point-blank range. The force of the explosion is so powerful that it sends the secretary flying backwards into the wall, but despite all the fireworks, she's still mostly unharmed, although she's really pissed that a relic of the past like Graham is giving her such a difficult time. Graham is amazed that a fireball of that level didn't do more damage, but at least he knows his tactics are still effective against her. The secretary is enraged and sprints forward in a frenzied attack, but all of her strikes are parried, and Graham connects cleanly with a slash to the chest, although it still doesn't get through the armor. She gets pushed back, and she doesn't understand how she could possibly be losing to a fossil like Graham. But even if Graham is old, he is still the hero who single-handedly ended the Immortal War, so there's no way something like this would be able to beat him. She decides to try one final attack and puts all her mana into her lightning strike because she couldn't possibly lose a full power clash against that rusty sword Graham is holding, but Graham corrects her and says his sword isn't rusty. It may be dormant right now, but as long as there is someone in need of a hero, it will always regain its light. Graham calls upon the power of the Exas word for the first time in centuries, and after a brief confirmation of Graham's noble intentions, the sword grants him permission to use its power, so he squares up against the secretary and tells her he is about to use his ultimate technique, the very same one that killed Veltal all those years ago. The secretary still tries her best to defeat Graham, but when she sees the size of his sword light growing, she realizes she isn't getting paid enough to deal with all this. But it's too late by then, so Graham unleashes his attack. It is still insanely powerful, so even though the sword only allowed him to use a fraction of the power that he possessed in his prime, Graham was still able to completely destroy the secretary's Magino gear with that one weakened strike. And it's honestly impressive that she managed to survive getting hit with it in the first place. The secretary has finally realized that she can't beat Graham, but she still doesn't understand why she lost to him. So Graham sits down next to her and explains that her defeat was mainly because of the difference in experience, especially since he has over 500 years of experience. The secretary asks why Graham is getting up to go help Veltal fight Marcus, but Graham thinks Veltal will be just fine on his own. She tells Graham that Veltal stands no chance against Marcus since Marcus is much stronger than her, and on top of that, no one without a familia will be capable of defeating or keeping up with Marcus in the first place. Graham tells her she is severely underestimating Veltal, although he understands why she would think Veltal is weaker than Marcus since she has never seen Veltal's trump card. The only person who knows about it is Graham since he had to fight Veltal to the death, but Veltal rarely ever used it, so even Marcus probably isn't aware of Veltal's legendary sword. Graham was only here to make sure that people like the Secretary don't interfere with Veltal's fight, so he is sure Veltal will come out victorious. If that's the case, then the Secretary asks Graham if he is going to kill her, but he says he's not. He's a hero and the Secretary is too injured to continue fighting him, so he has no reason to finish her off. Just then, magic bullets begin raining down on the two, so Graham uses his magic to cast a shield to keep them safe. It looks like reinforcements have arrived, but they were more than willing to shoot the Secretary along with Graham, so something tells him that she is in as much danger as he is. And if that's the case, what kind of hero would he be if he didn't protect an injured woman to the best of his abilities? Meanwhile, down in the core, Marcus has Makina by the throat and is just about done with his monologue, so he throws Makina into the furnace so her soul can be burnt up. But as she plummets to her certain doom, the only thing in Makina's mind is the fact that she will no longer be able to stand at Veltal's side. However, just before she hits the furnace, a cloud of black smoke rushes down and catches her. It then flies back up to the platform, and as Makina opens her eyes, she sees Veltal standing over her, saying he is here to save her. He turns to face Marcus, and Marcus is visibly annoyed by Veltal's presence, but he decides to pretend to be civil for a little while and mentions that he's been watching Veltal's streams lately, so he congratulates him for gaining 1 million subs. Veltal refuses to engage in idle chit-chat, but he wants to be fair about this, so he asks Marcus if he has any justifiable reason for attacking Makina and burning the souls of so many immortals. Marcus proudly states that he doesn't need to justify his actions to Veltal, so Veltal only has one more question to ask. He wants to know if Marcus will ever swear his loyalty to him again, but without skipping a beat, Marcus declares that he will never serve under Veltal for as long as he lives. Veltal has heard all he needs to hear, so he summons his demonic sword and declares that he will end Marcus's immortal life today. Marcus isn't fazed by Veltal's threat in the slightest, so he begins casting blood spears at Veltal, and even though Veltal is able to deflect them, Marcus makes the spears explode to catch him off guard and pulls out a blood sword so he can fight in close range. Veltal makes it out of the explosion unharmed, so he charges at Marcus, and Marcus notices that Veltal already has strengthening magic cast on himself. He admits that that was a smart move since Marcus can't cancel out magic that has already been activated, but despite Veltal's strengthening magic, Marcus is still able to keep up with and even overpower him in physical combat. Veltal gets knocked back to the ground, and Marcus takes great pleasure in seeing him down on his hands and knees, but Veltal refuses to give up because he still needs to punish Marcus for his heinous crimes against immortal kind. Marcus mocks Veltal and asks him if he really thinks he has what it takes to follow through on that threat, but there is no doubt in Veltal's mind about whether he can defeat Marcus or not because he is the one true demon lord. Marcus laughs in his face and starts dashing around the room as he tells Veltal that his days of being the demon lord are long gone. But Veltal doesn't fall for his provocation and catches Marcus as he was trying to sneak up from behind, so he raises his sword and aims straight for his neck to take out Marcus's familia. Unfortunately, Marcus saw this coming, so at the last second, he pushes Veltal's sword up so his strike only took out Marcus's head. After Marcus regenerates his head, he tells Veltal that he fully expected him to target his familia at some point in their fight, but no matter what Veltal tries, he is never going to be able to outpace him. Just like on the day Veltal got resurrected, the fact that he doesn't have a familia puts him at a significant disadvantage, and to make that clear to him, Marcus decides to display the power of his familia spell casting. Before Veltal can even react, Marcus casts a Bloody Bomb spell on his hand, and he continues doing it over and over again until Veltal's arms and legs have been atomized. He then decides to finish it off with a massive explosion to the chest, but even though Veltal is practically medium rare at this point and Marcus is on top, Marcus doesn't feel satisfied at all. He thought he would enjoy humiliating Veltal to this extent, but now that he has attained victory, all he feels is emptiness. He starts slowly walking towards Makina so he can throw her in the furnace like he planned earlier, but all of a sudden, he feels a terrifying pressure behind him. Veltal has gotten back to his feet and he seems more powerful than ever before. He commends Marcus for being able to corner him to this extent and admits that he really can't beat Marcus in his current form. All the power Marcus possesses in this current era is a result of his own hard work, and Veltal respects him for it, but that doesn't mean he will lose. He may have lost once before, but Veltal is still the final boss, and up till this point, Graham is the only one who has ever pushed him to this point. But before Veltal goes all out, he is going to ask Marcus one last time if he is willing to give up his evil ways and return to serve under Veltal once more. Marcus is visibly shaken and asks why Veltal would be bothered with a question like that at this point, so Veltal tells him that depending on Marcus's answer, he may be willing to overlook all the chaos that Marcus has caused. Marcus becomes erratic and starts yelling that Veltal's time as the Demon Lord is over, so he's going to make sure he gets rid of him and every other immortal so that he will be the only immortal Demon Lord. Veltal accepts that as a no, and Marcus attempts to cast a blood sword to attack Veltal before he can do anything, but his spell gets cancelled before he can finish. Marcus doesn't understand what just happened, but the panic is starting to set in really bad as Veltal is laughing maniacally. He says he will grant Marcus the honor of witnessing his glorious second form, so he begins his transformation. Meanwhile, outside the reactor base, Takahashi is fulfilling her role in Veltal's plan. This may be slightly illegal, but she uses her hacking skills to hijack every screen in the city and plays one of Veltal's pre-recorded streams for everyone to see. At first, the people are confused by the sudden ad, but Veltal's hot and his stream is entertaining, so their confusion soon becomes interest as the stream progresses. With that, Takahashi's job is done, so she thinks back to what Veltal told her on the ride here. He didn't have any specific orders for her, but he said he needed her to raise people's faith in him. She had no idea what he was talking about, so she asks for a little clarification on how exactly his faith boost works. Veltal didn't feel like explaining all the intricacies of his faith system, so he told her that all she needed to do was raise his popularity and that should do the trick. Takahashi initially didn't think it was possible since popularity can't be raised in a single day, but then again, she's an elite hacker in a technology-driven era, so she can do as much illegal stuff as necessary to make it happen. And the best part is that since she did it anonymously, the police are never going to catch her. Veltal's faith should be at an all-time high at this point, so it's up to him now to make use of it and save Makina. Down in the reactor core, Marcus is really starting to rethink his choices when he sees Veltal's second form. He never knew Veltal possessed a form like this, but Veltal calls him stupid for truly thinking he understood all the power of the Demon Lord. In order to manifest this form, Veltal requires a large amount of faith as well as direct access to some high-density aether ley lines. He welcomes Marcus to tremble in fear before his greatness, but Marcus still thinks he might have a chance of winning since Veltal still managed to lose to Graham back then. Veltal can't deny that he was defeated by Graham, but if Marcus thinks he is capable of replicating such an incredible feat, then he is more than welcome to try. Marcus nervously tries to cast his blood sword spell, but it's still not working, and no matter how many times he casts it, it keeps getting cancelled just before it is activated. Marcus doesn't understand why this is happening, but Veltal tells him there's nothing to be confused about since he is only replicating the same trick Marcus pulled the first time they fought. Back then, Marcus's familia let him stay 2 steps ahead of Veltal in terms of magic casting, but now with Veltal's new form and boosted capabilities, he has been able to achieve proclaimless magic. Marcus can't believe Veltal managed to achieve something like that in such a short time when even the latest magitech isn't able to recreate magic without incantations or proclamation, but it was pretty simple for Veltal to do once he took this form and fully analyzed Marcus's familia. Using proclaimless magic does eat up a lot of aether, but luckily Veltal is right next to a massive power source, so he can use it as much as he wants and can cast magic simply by thinking about it. And all this is thanks to Marcus, because even with Veltal's genius, he would never have been able to achieve this without Marcus's work as a baseline, so he once again commends him for his excellent work, but now it's time for his punishment. Marcus still refuses to accept that he has lost, so he tries to cast his blood swords again, but this time instead of just canceling Marcus's magic, Veltal decides to disable Marcus's familia altogether, so he can't spam his magic anymore. That doesn't stop Marcus from trying though, but he looks so pitiful and desperate that's kind of awkward. Eventually, it sinks in that he has been completely dominated, so he starts questioning how this could have possibly happened to him after all the careful planning he did to surpass Veltal. Veltal is getting sick of hearing Marcus whine, so he summons an explosion inside Marcus's mouth to shut him up and tells him to remain silent. However, Marcus regenerates his mouth and is about to begin yelling again, so Veltal uses wind magic to slice him up and fire magic to burn him to ash. Marcus is still able to regenerate from this, so Veltal just keeps hitting him with all kinds of magic until Marcus falls to the ground exhausted. Simply killing him isn't going to be enough of a punishment for the crimes Marcus has committed, so Veltal decides to take a page out of Takahashi's book and uses his magic to hack into Marcus's familia and make him see some terrifying shit. Marcus starts freaking out, so Veltal explains that none of those things are actually real. He is simply using Marcus's familia to feed his brain false visual information, and this kind of illusion is so realistic that one would never be able to tell the difference normally. Marcus can't believe Veltol was able to hack into his state-of-the-art familia so easily, but after everything else Veltol has done isn't actually that surprising. Marcus has basically lost all his advantages now, so between the threat of being killed over and over again at the hands of Veltol or being left to go insane while haunted by illusions, Marcus begins cowering in fear and pleading for his life. He even swears that he will loyally serve Veltol once more, but Veltol already gave him 2 chances to surrender, and he made it clear that there would be no mercy afterwards, so it's time to get on with Marcus' punishment. He raises his sword and stabs Marcus through the back while he's bowing and then raises his body up. But when Marcus opens his eyes, he realizes that he is being dangled off the immortal furnace, and his terrible fate begins to set in. Marcus asks Veltol if he's really going to drop him in the furnace, and Veltol doesn't hesitate to answer because that's exactly what he plans to do. Marcus tries to talk Veltol out of it since he stands to gain nothing by dropping Marcus in the furnace, but Veltol has very good reasons for wanting to drop Marcus in. 1, his face is annoying, and 2, if Marcus is dropped in the furnace, then it will continue to operate a little while longer, at least long enough for an alternative energy source to be invented. Marcus starts yelling that Veltol is no better than him since he is willing to use the machine that he came here to save Makina from, and while going through with this definitely is morally gray, Veltol isn't called a demon lord because he's a morally upstanding guy. Marcus starts arguing that aside from his selfish ambitions, there were circumstances that forced him to do things this way, so it's not entirely his fault, but Veltol isn't going to be talked down, so Marcus attempts to use some of his blood as a last-ditch attack. I have no idea why he thought that would do anything though. Veltol is done dealing with Marcus, so he uses his fingers to scrape Marcus' body off his sword and drops him into the immortal furnace, where he completely disintegrates and becomes fuel for the furnace. Now that Marcus is gone, Makina's bindings come undone and Veltol returns to normal, so it's all finally over. But this whole mess and the possibility of losing Makina forever have taught him a little bit about the value of life, so he has come to realize that he cares for Makina more than anything in this world and tells her that he loves her. Some time passes and we see a blonde girl in the school staring out the window because she's bored with her current life. She glances at a couple of girls in her class with Giga Chad jawlines, and the second they catch her looking at them, they begin calling her a loser in every way imaginable, and all without breaking their mewing streak. Just then, the teacher enters the class and tells everyone that they have a couple new transfer students joining their class today, and as she tells the first exchange student to introduce himself, we see Veltol proudly state his name and proclaim that he will leave his mark on this city. If you're wondering how we got here after the incident with Marcus, Veltol and Makina's lives pretty much went back to normal, and Veltol continues with his streaming career. He has just beaten the final boss of his speedrun campaign, and Makina has been cheering for him the whole time from the other room. Now that he's finally done, Veltol gloats over his victory to his viewers because they kept saying there was no way he would win. Although it did take him 3 days of non-stop gaming to finish a 10-hour game, so if he wasn't immortal, he'd probably be dead from sleep deprivation. In any case, his resilience has once again earned him a victory, so Veltol bids his viewers farewell and ends the stream. Now that his stream is finally over, Makina enters Veltol's room and congratulates him for successfully clearing the game, but she asks that he please take a break at least once every 24 hours, because she hasn't gotten to spend any time with him for the past 3 days. Veltol apologizes and says he will make sure to spend some quality time with her, but on a side note, Veltol and Makina no longer living in Makina's rundown apartment, so Veltol's channel must be doing really well. In fact, he has just reached 3 million subscribers, so Makina asks him if he would like to celebrate by going out to eat sushi. Veltol appreciates this sentiment, but he says there's no need to celebrate something as trivial as 3 million subs, because the true milestone is the fact that his power has risen to the point where he can now access his Dark Sword's second form at will. Makina congratulates him on that as well and again asks if he would like to go out for sushi to celebrate, so Veltol asks her if she really wants sushi that badly, but Makina says she doesn't particularly like sushi. Veltol is confused by this, but instead of asking her to explain, he's just going to ignore her statement and go back to talking about his sword's second form. Unfortunately, he doesn't have much of a use for it since his sword's second form was mainly used to execute immortals. Speaking of which, now that Marcus has been dealt with, Veltol thinks it's time for them to start looking for the rest of the immortal dark peers that went missing. The ones who were still missing are Ralshein, Sewell, and May, and knowing Marcus, he would definitely have bragged about killing them if he had done it, so it's safe to assume that they are still alive somewhere. Veltol asks Makina if she is willing to help him with this arduous task, and she swears that she will do all that she can to make sure they succeed. Now, as for how to find the other Dark Peters, Veltal recalls creating a Dark Peer's record at one point before he was defeated, so he asks Makina if she knows what happened to it. The Dark Peer records have all the mana signatures of the various Dark Peers engraved into it, so it keeps track of their location and activities automatically. However, Makina explains that the records went missing a long time ago, so it's going to be really hard to find them now. But even so, Veltal is determined to locate the rest of his subordinates no matter how long it takes. But just then, the doorbell rings, so they go to answer it and find Takahashi standing there. Veltal is surprised to see Takahashi in a uniform because she never told him she was a high schooler this entire time. He asks her if it's really alright for her to be doing all those dangerous and illegal jobs of hers when she's still a student, but Takahashi doesn't see anything wrong with it as long as she doesn't get caught. She also mentions that she saw Veltal's stream earlier, so she congratulates him on beating that game even if it did take him 3 days. Veltal is a little worried that his viewers might not like him streaming for so long, but Takahashi assures him that it's not that big of a deal. People usually just listen to long streams as background music, so as long as he posts some highlights every once in a while for those who can't watch the whole thing, he should be fine. She asks what game Veltal plans to stream next, but then there's an awkward silence since he doesn't plan on streaming for a while. Takahashi figures out that there's something Veltal and Makina aren't telling her, so she starts whining about how unfair it is that they would keep secrets from a friend like her. Veltal eventually decides to let her in on the mission and tells her that he is searching for an ancient magical gadget called the Dark Peer Records. Takahashi gets all excited after hearing this, since either means she gets to go on a treasure hunt. She tells Veltal he can rely on her to locate the records, since with her hacking skills, it shouldn't be that hard. She begins searching the internet, but Makina doesn't think it'll be that easy to locate ancient techniques online, and while she may be right, Takahashi has her ways of finding what she needs to know. First, she searches through all the possible locations where the records could be, including collections, museums, and ruins. And after cross-referencing the data, she finally locates the records in Akihabara City. It's one of the satellite cities of Shinjuku, and it's also home to the most prestigious magic academy in the world, Lu-Hesel. The school was founded right after the Immortal War ended, and there are rumors that there's a treasure buried beneath it. But the door to the treasure vault has remained sealed for over 500 years. The timeline of the school's formation lines up with the time the record would have gone missing, so Veltal believes it has to be in that treasure vault. Makina asks if they should bust in there and take the records by force, but Takahashi thinks that plan is way too barbaric. It'd be way easier for them to just sneak in undetected and steal it since Takahashi can disable their security system, but Veltal has an even better idea in mind. If they are going to sneak into a school anyway, why not simply enroll as students and blend in? That sounds pretty fun to Takahashi, so she offers to forge the documents for them, and Veltal officially declares that he will be going to school. The next day, they get their things ready and set out for Akihabara City, but when they finally arrive, Veltal gets stuck at the immigration gate by a robot asking for his ID. However, Veltal has 3 million subs now, so he is outraged that the robot doesn't already know who he is. He was just about to call for a manager, but Takahashi doesn't want to deal with any Karen outbursts from Veltal, so she just shows the robot his identification and drags him away so they can keep heading for the school. Once they leave the station, Veltal's eyes light up because this place looks exactly like Almeith did back in the day, and he feels nostalgic getting to see it again. This city is known for its advanced Magi engineering, so the magical prosthetics sold here are some of the best in the world and perform extraordinarily. Such incredible technology would have been impossible to make during his era. Magical prosthetics are one thing, but for them to be so advanced that it's possible for people to replace their entire body, that's beyond anything he could have imagined. Takahashi tells him that while it may be possible to replace everything, after what happened to David Martinez, people decided to stick to more moderate implants. The group moves on, and eventually, they arrive at the doorstep of the Lu-Hesel Academy, but Veltal is disappointed since this place doesn't match the Almeith aesthetic the rest of the city has. They head inside and meet with Trot Gotel, principal of the Magical Academy, to officially be admitted to the school, but Trot is no ordinary person. She's the leader of one of the 3 great houses in this city, the Gotels, and she pretty much runs half of Akihabara City, so Takahashi isn't sure her forged documents will fool her, so she was totally prepared to pull as much random bullshit as necessary to get Trot to accept them. However, to her surprise, after Veltal tells Trot his name, Trot just accepts their documents without any further questioning. But there is one more thing she's curious about, so she asks why Veltal decided to come to this school. Takahashi was about to make up a lie, but before she could say anything, Veltal answered, saying they came here to take a look inside the treasury beneath the school. Trot then asks why Veltal is interested in the treasury, but Veltal just says that no secrets can escape his keen eye. From there, Trot and Veltal start saying stuff Takahashi can't understand, but by the end of their conversation, Trot accepts that Veltal is just a cool dude who low-key wants to look at the treasury, so she's fine with granting him access. But there's just one problem. She wants to grant him access, but she can't because the treasury is currently sealed and has been sealed for the past 500 years. Veltal asks if it's possible for the seal to be removed, so Trot explains that in order to undo the seal, they need the three houses, the Gotels, the Sippards, and the Reynards to agree and gather their regalias together to act as a key. This sword right here is one of the three regalias known as Gotel's Blade, so to undo the seal, Veltal would need to acquire the Sippard's crown and the Reynard's orb. And if he can manage to pull it off, then Trot will gladly open the seal for him. To be honest, she's personally interested in seeing the contents of that vault herself, but there has been one major obstacle in her way. The Reynard's orb is currently missing. The group is later introduced to Miss Mag, their new homeroom teacher, and she leads them to their new classroom. Although, in accordance with the rules of the school, Makina and Takahashi were required to remove their familias, and Takahashi feels strange not having her familia since she's so used to wearing it all the time. This school puts a lot of emphasis on traditional magic studies, so it is strictly prohibited for any student to wear a familia on school grounds. Veltal personally agrees with this policy since while a familia may be an incredible aid for everyday life, one can't truly understand magic unless one learns to do it unassisted. Once they arrive at the class, Mag tells them to come in one after another after she has explained everything to the rest of the class. While the teacher is gone, Veltal asks Makina and Takahashi what they should do for their introductions. He recently played a game with a transfer student in it, and he discovered that it is absolutely essential to have an impactful introduction, which leads us to his introduction. After Veltal boldly introduces himself, Makina and Takahashi do the same in their own ways, and once introductions are out of the way, Miss Mag calls Veltal over because she needs to measure his magical power with this crystal for his class assessment. Veltal understands why she wants to assess his magic, but he wants to warn her ahead of time because he is sure that he will end up breaking that crystal. Mag thinks Veltal is just overreacting and tells him that there's no way the crystal will break, but as Veltal attempts to use it, the crystal indeed breaks. Meanwhile, we see Graham in the city and he looks like he is searching for something. After the Marcus incident, he became friends with the secretary, so he's having her help him in his search for his goddess. After the whole crystal incident, Magura decides to just go on with class as usual and begins her lecture on the dangers of soul channeling as planned. But then she notices that Veltal is just staring at her with a smile on his face, so she stops what she's doing and asks him why he's not taking any notes. Veltal understands why she would be concerned, but he assures her that there's no need to worry about his studies since he already has the topic completely memorized. Magura doesn't believe Veltal could possibly have memorized the entire history of soul channeling in one day, so she tries to prove him wrong by asking him about a very particular incident that happened centuries ago. But before she's even done asking the question, Veltal realizes she must be talking about the Railrod incident. During that era, Railrod was a court mage for the royal family, and he had been experimenting with the idea of channeling a hero's soul into his body. But at the same time, he found out that his wife invested his life savings in hawk coin and got rug-pulled, so he lost control, leading to a major disaster. Maguro cuts him off there since it's clear Veltal wasn't joking about having the history memorized, but the way Veltal answered the question got the attention of everyone in class, since he was talking as if he witnessed the event in person. Even the class outcast finds him interesting, but she prefers to stay away from flashy people like him. At lunchtime, Hizuki is sitting alone in the courtyard as usual, and she's still a bit curious about Veltal and his friends since they seem pretty weird, but all of a sudden, she gets confronted by Albert Haygrams, who came over for the sole reason of making fun of Hizuki. He mocks her for being completely talentless when it comes to magic, and tells her she's a disgrace to the Reynard family. However, he doesn't stop with insulting her. He also calls her father a bum, and her elf mother a fool for having a child like her. Now, me personally, I wouldn't let that kind of disrespect slide, and neither does Hizuki, because she slams her hands on her table and tells Albert that she won't allow him to slander the name of her parents like that. Albert doesn't see anything wrong with what he said, so he's about to continue his tirade of insults. But before he can utter another word, Veltal yells for him to be silent. He was peacefully enjoying a bowl of udon, but then Albert came along and ruined it for him with his hypocritical notion of superiority. Albert tells Veltal that he has no right to call him a hypocrite when all he does is play video games to make money. But even if Albert thinks streaming isn't a real job, the fact that he knows about Veltal's channel means he must be one of his viewers, so Veltal thanks him for contributing to his ad revenue. Albert denies being a fan of Veltal's stream and asserts that he is the eldest son of the Haygrams family, so he would never waste his time on something so trivial. But now that Albert mentioned the Haygram's family name, Veltel remembers where he's heard that name before. He had met Albert's ancestor, Ganfel Haygrams, once before on the battlefield, but the second Ganfel saw him, he chose to run away in disgrace rather than die at the hands of Veltel. It seems that Ganfel's cowardice allowed him to survive long enough to create a family, but Veltel never could have imagined that he would get to meet Ganfel's descendants in person. This has put Veltel in a good mood, so he decides to forgive Albert for ruining his Yudan. But he still doesn't understand why Albert was mocking Hazuki when she possesses even more talent than he does. Albert couldn't argue with Veltel for calling his ancestor a coward since it really did happen, but one thing he won't stand for is Veltel saying Hazuki is better than him. The gloves are off now, so Albert formally challenges Veltel to a duel so the two of them settle their differences. And Hazuki is left wondering how things got to this point since she never asked Veltel for his help. In the school stadium, Makina and Takahashi walk up to Hazuki, and Takahashi doesn't know much about Hazuki, but it's clear no one likes her, so she asks what Hazuki did to be treated as such a loser. Hazuki explains that the other students don't like the fact that she is attending this school where she's a failure of a student. In theory, Hazuki's grades here are really good, but she can't use magic, so people tell her she has no place at a magic academy. Takahashi doesn't want to be mean, but she also doesn't understand why Hazuki would go through all the trouble of attending a magic academy when she can't use magic, but Hazuki has her reasons for it. The conversation is getting a little awkward, so Makina changes the subject and talks about how surprising it is that the school sanctioned this duel in the first place. Hazuki tells them that one of the goals of the academy is to train mages to be capable of combat, so duels are actually encouraged as long as you get a teacher to supervise, and it looks like Mag is the one stuck on supervision duty today, so she asks Veltel and Albert to get this over with soon, because the lunch break is going to end any minute now. They both agree to make this as quick as possible, but before the match begins, Veltel calls over to Hazuki and tells her to watch the match closely because she is about to witness his greatness. However, Albert tells Veltel to stop acting like he has already won the match since he is at a great disadvantage here, because out of everyone attending this school, Albert is the only person who received an A+ in mana release, mana manipulation, and mana reserves. So in other words, Albert is the most powerful student at this school. Veltel can't make any comments on Albert's mana release or manipulation since he hasn't seen those, but when it comes to mana reserves, he can clearly see that Hazuki possesses a far larger reserve than he does. Hazuki doesn't know what Veltel is talking about since she got an F in her mana reserves evaluation, but if Veltel claims that Hazuki's mana reserves are truly that amazing, then Makina is sure the school must have made a mistake since Veltel is never wrong about this kind of thing. Hazuki doesn't argue about it, but she thinks it's weird that Makina treats everything Veltel says like gospel. Albert doesn't believe what Veltel said is true, so he tells him to just get ready for the fight to start, and Veltel is more than ready, but he doesn't think it would be fair if he fought normally, so instead he gives Albert a handicap and says he won't move an inch from this spot. Albert thinks Veltel is trying to make fun of him, but Veltel is so serious that he is willing to make an oath with Albert. If he loses the rematch or moves from this spot, then he will do whatever Albert says, but if he wins the match, then Albert is forbidden from harassing Hazuki from now on. Hazuki doesn't understand why Veltel would go so far for her sake when they barely know each other, so she tries telling Makina to convince him to call off the match. Albert may be a jerk, but he really is the strongest student at this school, so she doesn't want Veltel to get hurt fighting for her. But Takahashi and Makina are confident that there's no way Veltel could lose, and besides, it's too late to call it off since Albert already agreed to the terms of the oath, and they've both sworn on their names to uphold it. The match officially begins, and Albert starts charging up his attack spell, but Veltel cuts him off in the middle of his chant and tells him this will be boring if he uses so little mana. He wants Albert to fire at him with everything he's got so he can at least have a little fun, and Albert takes that personally, so he starts casting his spell at max power. Mag tries to calm Albert down since a spell of that level could actually kill someone, but Veltel tells her there's no need to worry since this is exactly what he wants to see. It has been a while since Veltel got to participate in an old-fashioned magic duel, so he wants to savor it a little. Albert fires his magic arrow, and unsurprisingly, Veltel catches it with one hand before it could hit him, but even so, he's honestly impressed with the strength Albert was able to put into that attack, but it still wasn't enough to make him move. Albert can't believe Veltel managed to catch one of his full-strength spells with nothing but his bare hands, but tells him he should be proud of himself, because with another 200 years of training, Albert would be strong enough to become a mildly challenging opponent for him. He apologizes for his rude remarks earlier about Albert's ancestor because he respects how much hard work Albert must have put in to achieve this level of power in the modern era. And as a reward, Veltel is going to give him a taste of the true essence of magic, so he points a finger at Albert and fires some compressed mana, knocking him out completely. Veltal is declared the winner of the duel, and once he leaves the stadium, he tells Hazuki that his victory is dedicated to her. Hazuki shyly thanks him, but at the same time, she warns him to stay away from her since she's bound to cause trouble for him if he hangs around her. After school, Veltal, Takahashi, and Makina take a walk through the city, and Takahashi talks about how surprising it is that there are still rich brats like Albert in a school like this. In fact, she can't stand the whole school in general since it doesn't allow her to have her familia and forces her to wear this uniform. She asks Veltal if he can just use magic to open the vault on his own so they can speed up this trip. And while that technically is possible, he doesn't think it's a good idea since ancient seals like that usually self-destruct if they are forced open. They are just going to have to gather the regalia the hard way, but since they already have Trott's cooperation, they only need to get the other two. The crown is held by the representatives of Electric Town. But the real problem is the orb that's missing. It's going to be damn near impossible to find a treasure when they have no clues as to where it went, but Veltal corrects her since they actually have a really good lead. The orb that went missing is owned by the Reynard family, and it just so happens that they met the head of the Reynard family today, so they can ask her about it later. For now, they have another matter to attend to since they've just arrived at their destination. This is the other side of Akihabara City, but this is Veltal's first time ever being here, so Takahashi welcomes him to the Electric Town. Veltal is amazed by how densely packed this place part of the city is, and he is interested in exploring it since it reminds him of the labyrinths he used to build, but Takahashi stops him since this place is a real tourist trap. Rumor has it that if you get lost, you could be stuck in there for days and come out broke. That's why Takahashi says they need to have a guide who is familiar with the area, and as luck would have it, Takahashi is a specialist when it comes to gathering information, so she says she knows the perfect place for them to go, a maid cafe. Veltal trusts Takahashi's judgment, but he's starting to worry that this place isn't really the best choice for gathering information about the regalia. But on the contrary, Takahashi assures him that this place is perfect since all kinds of people come here and the maids love to gossip, so it's easy to overhear things. Veltal understands now and apologizes to Takahashi for doubting her since he had thought she just brought them here for fun. But in reality, Takahashi did bring them here solely to have fun. Makina doesn't really mind spending time in a maid cafe, but something she does mind is the fact that the prices here are incredibly high. Takahashi suddenly starts yelling that those prices are necessary to give you the dream experience of being served by cheery maids, but Veltal and Makina don't see what's so special about it since they've lived most of their immortal lives as royalty. That aside, Veltal is still deep in thought over what happened earlier today with Hazuki. She seems like she's purposefully avoiding people, so trying to convince her to talk with them will probably make her avoid them even more. It's a shame since Makina actually likes Hazuki quite a bit because she seems like a good person. Takahashi agrees with Makina, but she is also getting impatient since she wants to enjoy her maid cafe time, so she ends the conversation and uses the request system to call over the maid with the biggest pie. A few seconds later, their maid arrives, but to their utter surprise, the maid turns out to be Hazuki, and she is horrified to see her classmates here. Hazuki never expected to see these three again, much less while dressed like this, but Makina and Takahashi are really happy with the way things turned out. Even Veltal decides to have some fun with the situation and tells Hazuki that he would like to order the same thing as that table over there. He then points to a group receiving the Moe special performance with their meal, and Hazuki is dreading the idea of having to do that in front of her classmates because she'd die of embarrassment. Makina tells her she doesn't have to do it if she doesn't want to, but Hazuki takes pride in her role as a maid, so if it's cute they want, it's cute they're going to get. She heads to the back to the kitchen to get their food ready, and once she returns, she does her best to give them the full maid cafe experience. But the entire time she's internally screaming in embarrassment. Once they are done with their meal, Veltal and the others compliment Hazuki on her excellent service, but since there's no one left in the store now, they tell her she can relax. Hazuki doesn't waste a second and immediately sits down before taking Takahashi's drink to cool off. Getting down to business, Veltal asks to confirm that Hazuki is the head of the Reynard clan and tells her that he needs her regalia. Hazuki asks him why he needs it, so Veltal explains that he wants to unlock the treasure vault beneath the school, so he is gathering all the regalia to do it. Hazuki wouldn't mind helping him, but unfortunately, she tells him she doesn't have the regalia anymore, so she can't give it to him. And because her regalia is lost, the Reynard family is pretty much ruined, so she's just a poor student working a part-time job to survive. Takahashi is a bit curious, so she asks Hazuki why the regalia are so important in the first place, and Hazuki explains that the regalia are objects that serve as proof of the owner's kingship. As she talks about it, her eye suddenly starts to hurt, and Veltal notices this, but Hazuki goes on to finish her explanation. According to her parents, after the hero Graham defeated the demon lord 500 years ago, the goddess Meldia grew very fond of Graham and bestowed upon him the regalia, a large territory, treasures, and her blessing. However, Graham was eventually exiled by the king of the time because he was perceived as a threat. So before he left, Graham handed down the regalia and all his treasures to the man who would become King Lu Xl II, and as time went on, he entrusted the regalia to his 3 sons. His sons found it impossible to share the wealth and power, so instead they formed 3 opposing factions, which are now known as the 3 Great Families. The families, for the most part, don't get in each other's way for the most part, but there is still some lingering resentment among them, which is why they've never come together to unseal the treasure vault. And it's probably never going to happen now since the orb regalia is gone now. She doesn't even know why Veltal bothered asking her about it since he knows it's missing, but Veltal actually had a different reason for wanting to talk to Hazuki. He asks her if she could get him in contact with Cornea Sibbard, and Hazuki thinks it should be easy enough to get Cornea to meet with Veltal as long as she is with them. And since she still owes Veltal a favor for sticking up for her in school, she agrees to get a meeting with Cornea for them. Takahashi is so happy that she starts hugging Hazuki to thank her, but then Hazuki's stomach starts growling since she hasn't eaten anything all shift, so she gets embarrassed. Veltal decides to take her to a different restaurant so she can get something to eat, but he is honestly surprised by how much food Hazuki can eat. But changing the subject, Makina says she is impressed with how easily Hazuki was able to schedule a meeting with Cornea on such short notice, especially considering the fact that he's the most powerful man in the city. Hazuki doesn't think she really did anything special, but she doesn't want to barge in on Cornea with a crowd, so she says she can only bring 1 person with her. Veltal declares that he will be the one to go then. And now that that's been decided, he takes a bite out of one of the meat sandwiches and he loves it. This place is known for their incredible genetically modified meat, although chicken and pork options are really expensive, so most people just stick to the beef. Makina is a little curious and asks Hazuki what kind of meat she's eating since it doesn't look like beef, so Hazuki explains that it's dragon meat. Both Veltal and Makina are a little disturbed by this since one of Veltal's subordinates and Makina's comrade was Silwol the Black Dragon, so they are hesitant to eat meat from the same species as him. Hazuki asks if that means they are too scared to try it, but Veltal and Makina take that as a challenge and immediately take a bite out of 2 dragon meat sticks. And surprisingly, they actually like it. Feels like beef but tastes like chicken, so Makina starts wishing they had eaten some of Silwol's meat while he was still around since he would have just regenerated anyway. Once they are all done eating, Takahashi and Hazuki are having some fun, but all of a sudden, they are approached by some cops. And these cops are here solely because they recognized Hazuki and want to cause trouble for her. They say they are placing her under arrest for suspicious activity, but just before the situation gets bad, Trot shows up and points out that Hazuki and the others are clearly just having a meal together, and last time she checked, that wasn't illegal. The officers came after Hazuki because she doesn't have much influence or authority, but Trot, on the other hand, is someone they can't afford to mess with, so they back off for now. Once the officers are gone, Trot apologizes to everyone for that unsightly display by the officers, and Takahashi thanks her for getting them out of that mess. Trot tells them there's no need to thank her, but she is wondering what they are all doing out here, so Veltal tells her that Hazuki is just giving them a tour of Akihabara City. He then asks why Trot is out here, so Trot explains that she came to meet with Professor Maguro, but before that, she would like to have a brief discussion with Hazuki. Veltal gets the hint, so he invites Makina and Takahashi to go get some more snacks with him. And while they are gone, Hazuki and Trot get to talk in private. Trot is glad Hazuki has made such good friends, but regarding the discussion she wanted to have, she tells Hazuki that her previous offer is still on the table. Hazuki tries to act like she doesn't know what Trot is talking about, so Trot reiterates that she wants to adopt Hazuki into her family. Hazuki says she can't accept the offer because if Trot took her in, then all the other nobles would turn against her, but Trot says she can handle that, so she just wants Hazuki to be able to live a happy life. Hazuki appreciates Trot looking out for her, but she still can't accept the offer because she wants to protect the Reynard family name as much as possible for the sake of her parents. Trot accepts her decision, but she wants her to remember that she will always be on Hazuki's side, no matter what. She needs to leave now, so Trot says goodbye to Hazuki and tells her to have fun with her new friends, but as Trot leaves, the pain in Hazuki's head starts acting up again. This time, Takahashi notices it, so she asks Hazuki if she's alright, but even though she clearly isn't, Hazuki says she is fine. A little while later, Hazuki goes to meet Cornea with Veltal, and the two are introduced to Cornea's assistant Meryl, who says he will take them to Cornea's office, but before that, he needs to do a security check on the two of them. Meryl uses his glasses to scan the two, and after a brief moment, he gives them the green light to head in and meet Cornea. Surprisingly, Cornea turns to be a blinged-out goblin, and Veltal voices his astonishment since all the descendants of Lubrixel were elves, so he finds it strange that a goblin is the head of one of the great families. Hizuki tells Veltal to stop talking since he is being rude, but Cornea isn't bothered by Veltal's comments since it isn't normal for a goblin to lead a family of elves. In fact, Cornea used to be a regular old merchant, but he clawed his way up to his current position. His upbringing wasn't great, but he somehow ended up taking care of the former head of the Sibird clan, and eventually, before Cornea even knew it, he was adopted into the family. But that's enough about his past for now. Cornea wants to know what Veltal wants from him. Veltal tells him that he wants to ask about the regalia, and Cornea finds that interesting, so he snaps his fingers and summons the crown regalia to show Veltal. The fact that Cornea could summon it so easily makes Veltal think it must be some sort of soul armament, but Cornea corrects him and explains that the crown, as well as the other regalia, were all created from fragments of the goddess Meldia's soul. As such, the regalias can be stored within the user's soul, so unless the user willingly relinquishes it or gets killed, it's never going to leave his side. Veltal asks if that means he can claim the crown if he kills Cornea, and that puts everyone on edge, but Veltal says it's just a prank, bro, so they all calm down. Veltal may have been joking about killing Cornea to get it, but he does need the regalia, so he politely asks Cornea if he'd be willing to let him borrow it. He needs it to open the treasure vault since the item he is looking for might be in there. Normally, Cornea would never agree to something like that, but since Hizuki was the one who brought him here, he decides to trust Veltal a little. However, even if he were to give Veltal the regalia, there would be no point to it. To open the vault, one needs to possess all three regalia, but it also means undergoing the process of becoming this city's true king. Essentially, it would reunite the fragments of the goddess's soul in one body, effectively summoning Meldia. Cornea has something he wants to say to Veltal in private, so he asks everyone besides him to step outside for a moment, and once he is alone with him, he asks Veltal to tell him what his true intentions are. And in exchange, Cornea will tell him everything he knows as well. This is something he doesn't want Hizuki to hear about, so he asks Veltal to keep it a secret, but the orb regalia that went missing is somewhere close by. Cornea can't pinpoint the exact location, but as a regalia wielder, he can sense the presence of the other regalia as long as they are within Akihabara City. He wants Veltal to do him a favor and protect Hizuki to the best of his ability, since even though she tries to act tough, she can be surprisingly weak at times. Cornea cares about Hizuki a lot since he owes her father a huge debt, but unfortunately, her father died before he could repay him. So the least Cornea can do is keep the man's daughter safe for him. And regarding the mission orb, according to the records Cornea has of the Reynard family, she inherited it at a young age, so it must be bonded to her soul. And that makes Hizuki the key to finding it. A little while later, Veltal and Hizuki return to Makina and Takahashi, and Veltal is happy to say that he has gotten Cornea's cooperation. Although Cornea technically hasn't given him the crown yet, but he did give Veltal some valuable information, so the meeting was a success, and it's all thanks to Hizuki. Hizuki is a little embarrassed to be receiving so much praise, so she turns away in embarrassment. Since their main objective for the night has been completed, Takahashi asks what they should do now. Makina was thinking of going to buy some Demon Lord comics, and Veltal was thinking of going to an arcade. But Takahashi tells them it was too late to start doing all of that. She would normally suggest they should head back to the school dorms right about now, but since Hizuki is here, she suggests they should all sleep over at Hizuki's house. Makina thinks it's a great idea, so she asks Veltal if he's okay with it, and Veltal says he doesn't mind staying at Hizuki's house, but Hizuki says she never agreed to any of this. Takahashi tries to convince her and says this will be a great opportunity for them to get to know each other better, and Hizuki kind of likes the idea of that, so she ends up agreeing to let them stay over at her house. But a few hours later, she's regretting that decision because she somehow ended up naked in the bath with Veltal. This was the end of episode 10. Subscribe to not miss the next part.